Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Boozer with CUGC HQ, and I'm glad to welcome you to today's webinar with Dave Brett and Jarian Gibson. Glad to have them back on our stage. They're frequent flyers, I think. I love having you guys here. But before I hand things over to you, just going to go over a couple of things. For starters, we have a busy Excel season coming up soon. Our next one is in Chicago, CUGC Excel Great Lakes, and hopefully you can make it there. Our Excels are open to any and all CUGC members. So if you're in any of these areas, Denmark, the Northeast and New York City or Chicago, we'd definitely love to have you come out. I'm going to throw a link in the chat in a little bit to these events so you can check out the speakers. We've got some really great speakers from Citrix and Citrix community, lots of great information out there. And then our fourth Excel in July is virtual. So that one you can join from your pajama wearing self in your own home. Just kidding. But definitely check those out. Also, CUGC is on Slack and Discord now, and we'd love to have you join our conversations over there. By default, when you come in, you'll be in our general channels, which are all public, but you can also request to join your local group channel so that you can talk to your CUGC pals in your area. So definitely check that out, and we'll send links to that as well in the chat and in the follow-up emails. So be on the lookout for those. And then also we are recording today's session. You'll get a link to that recording in email tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that. Also, we have the chat and the Q&A panels for you to interact in today. Say hello in the chat and ask your questions in the Q&A panel. And we'll do our best to get to all of those questions and comments today as we go along. All right, without further ado, I'm about to hand things off. So Dave Brett is a senior solutions architect and a CTP at Nutanix. And Jarian Gibson is a staff solutions architect for EUC at Nutanix, and he's also a CTP and our Kansas City Metro CUGC leader. So I'm going to hand things, I think, over directly to you, Dave, to get us started. Thanks for coming and welcome.
No problem. Thanks very much. Let me just get this shared. Shout if you can see that all right.
Good to go.
All good. All right. Thanks for having us again. Going to talk about Nutanix Cloud Clusters on Azure and AWS with Citrix today. Myself and Jarian are going to go through that. Just what we're going to go through. First, going to talk about Nutanix Hybrid Cloud with Citrix. Just a bit of an introduction on that. Then a Nutanix Cloud Clusters overview, so just roughly what it's all about, and then dive into what Citrix can do on Nutanix Cloud Clusters. There's going to be some additional resources up there for you to look at afterwards, and then hopefully questions. We are planning on having a demo if I can get through these slides quick enough. With that in mind, Stephanie already did a good job of introducing myself and Jarian. Is there anything you want to add, Jay, or is that all good?
All good here.
Alrighty. So let's get into it. Nutanix hybrid multi-cloud with Citrix, just an introduction. So what people are ending up with right now is on-prem EUC or VDI, where you have base images, desktops, applications, all your network policies and user profiles running in your private cloud. And then more often than not, the business is asking for a workload or some kind of VDI DaaS solution in the public cloud. So people are going ahead and building them out there, and that results in a segregated set of apps, desktops, data management policies and stuff like that, which creates more complex environments and a lot of confusion with the users that are using the platform. You can kind of solve that problem with a hybrid and multi-cloud EUC architecture. So what would happen is you would take the broker away and move that into the cloud. something like Citrix DaaS, you can run that as a control plane in the public cloud as a SaaS service from Citrix, and then point that back to either your on-prem data center and your cloud data center. The issue with that is you still have two distinct environments to manage, albeit under one Citrix umbrella. You have base images, desktops, apps, network policies on your on-prem environment, and then the same in native cloud, where you might have to refactor that image to move it around. You may have to like tweak certain things in the applications to make them work with the business app sitting behind it running in the public cloud. So what you're after really is we need a common platform across the private cloud and the public cloud. We've dealt with the broker side of it, but you need a common software stack that will run both your on-premises hardware as well as the bare metal hardware that you choose across the public clouds. And then that's kind of when we get to what we're going to talk about today, the Nutanix Cloud Platform. You'll probably hear me refer to NC2 a lot during this today. That's effectively referring to the Nutanix Cloud Platform. We're going to talk about the ability to use the same software stack across your data centers, whether they be AWS, Azure, or your on-premises data center, and how Nutanix can bridge that gap between on-prem and cloud management, be that AWS, Azure, or any other cloud provider that we are going to move to in the future. Having the Citrix DaaS sitting on top of the Nutanix Cloud Clusters will give you a single pane of glass for your on-prem and your cloud environments and your Citrix workloads. What that's going to mean in a nutshell, we're going to show how the Nutanix Cloud Platform, it will simplify your image management across clouds, be that persistent or non-persistent desktops. You can move those around. We're going to reduce the need to refactor images, reduce an admin overhead of running your Citrix platform in a hybrid multi-cloud environment. And we're going to make visibility into your entire EUC platform, be that on-prem or in the public cloud, easier with that single pane of glass that we mentioned earlier. The key to all of this is workload portability. So with the Citrix Cloud control plane sitting on top of Nutanix Cloud Clusters, you're going to be able to move your workloads to the best place for your business. One example of this is, say your business has an in-house written application with a big backend database that is currently running in one of your private data centers, and the business decide to then move that to Azure. As a Citrix admin or a Citrix architect, you need to be able to provision user workloads next to that data for performance reasons. And what NC2 and Citrix running together will enable you to do is seamlessly move that out to the public cloud and back if need be, using the whole single click methodology that Nutanix follow. Effectively, it's giving you the choice of where you want to run your user workloads, and more importantly, when you want to run them out there. So you can move things to and from as you see fit. And that brings us to this, is being a single cloud platform for the Citrix digital workplace. So using the Citrix Cloud control plane or the customer managed CVAD control plane, license permitting, there's going to be a single pane of glass with one-click mobility, simplicity of management, and time to value for hybrid multi-cloud deployments. And it kind of shows Citrix and Nutanix being a yin and a yang, or as Jarian said before, I think it was peas and carrots. In Europe, we probably refer to that as cheese and red wine or something along those lines, but we do sit very well together. Us as Nutanix, we do support multiple hypervisors on Nutanix, but for the case of Nutanix Cloud Clusters, we're going to be talking about AHV only. However, that being said, we do have cross hypervisor hypervisor DR tools if you're using a ESXi or Hyper-V on-prem, which will allow you to move those workloads up to NC2 using that same single-click, simple methodology that Nutanix deliver. So with that in mind, Citrix and Nutanix, it says up here, powering the future of work in a true hybrid multi-cloud environment. In a nutshell, that means from the Citrix side, Nutanix is the preferred choice for HCI and hybrid multi-cloud deployments, be that on-prem CVAD or with the new licensing or with Citrix DaaS. And from the Nutanix side, Citrix is the preferred choice for enterprise EUC deployments on top of the Nutanix software, be that in your own data center or in a public cloud using NC2. One thing I wanted to highlight here, so our teams at Nutanix meet with Citrix on a bi-weekly basis to go over a joint roadmap to enhance and improve not only the performance of Citrix on Nutanix, but also the integration points that we have between the two platforms. So it's a continually evolving process whereby we're trying to improve how Citrix is delivered on top of the HCI stack at Nutanix, be that on-prem or in the public cloud on NC2. Moving on, going to do a Nutanix Cloud Clusters overview. So thinking about the journey your business is going to go through, you're going to end up eventually at a fork in the road where you're going to need to decide where it's best to run your workloads, whether that be in your private cloud or whether it be on the public cloud or both. Thinking about the private cloud, what you get out of that is you get predictable workloads because it's all in your own data center. You own it, you've got your arms around it, you can like nurture it and make sure it's running properly. It's cost effective in that you buy the hardware and you can sit on it and run on it for as long as you deem fit for purpose or until it stops working as you expect. It's performance heavy as you can pick and choose what you want to install, what vendor you want to use, as well as being a reliable ecosystem as you'd normally with your private data center have agreements in a place for vendor support, have long-term relationships with those vendors. So there's a huge level of knowledge about what's actually in that data center. Switching to the public cloud and the advantage of that, you've got cloud native apps and workloads. These are quite often better for certain workloads. You can use the public cloud for elastic burst workloads that require temporary scale or possibly even for a DR solution. Just-in-time provisioning of workloads, as it's often more flexible in the public cloud than internal IT teams to get stuff delivered quickly, or even seasonal workloads like Christmas, Black Friday, big sporting events, stuff like that, where you need increase in compute for short periods of time. Just keep these 8 things in mind as we run through Nutanix Cloud Clusters and how we can bridge that gap of running Citrix on both of those environments. So what does the new data center look like? Traditionally, everything sits in your own data centers. It might be co-located somewhere else with a service provider or something, but it's your hardware. That landscape's changing pretty quickly. Most businesses, certainly here in the UK, are extending their data center into the public cloud. In some cases, they're getting rid of their owned data centers completely and moving everything to the public cloud. But there's still a requirement which is growing for regional availability with the workloads that sit closer to where your users are. This is for legislation reasons in some cases and also performance reasons. But there's also a requirement to access SaaS applications that are hosted in the public cloud. So hybrid multi-cloud is the new data center, and with that new data center, things are changing. You're going to require visibility into all of your locations, whether that be on-prem or in the public cloud, and that visibility needs to be overarching over all of it. Whether that be in Azure, AWS, specific to cloud clusters, or with our third-party bare metal vendors like Equinix, Sextera, or OVH Cloud. you're going to require cross-cloud security and networking regardless of where those Citrix workloads are running, because that needs to be consistent for Citrix to operate properly. And then latency and connection is going to become more important as you scale across multiple data centers, multiple geos, because you're going to need to provide decent access to the Citrix resources sitting on NC2 underneath that. So if we think about the ideal state for workloads in this new environment, ideally you want to be able to unify your hybrid and multi-cloud data centers. You also want the ability to move your workloads between those data centers, whether that be on-prem to the public cloud or back. Going back to that example earlier, in an ideal world, if the business says we're moving the back end, you should be able to just shift that workload seamlessly. But also, if it's too expensive running it in the cloud, or if it's not performing right, you should be able to move it back. It needs to be elastic, but you've also got to have predictable costs in that. You need ease of use across all of your data centers, and you've got to have the ability to use multiple DCs, but not at the cost of performance. But doing that is challenging from an operational standpoint and an infrastructure standpoint. If you think about just operationally, like adopting a hybrid cloud approach, it's challenging because the first thing you need to worry about is skill set. So mainly, if you're running AHV now on premises, your Citrix teams are looking after it. They're used to how that works. And if the business then move applications to, say, Azure, then your Citrix admins are going to have to learn a completely new interface, a new way of provisioning images, a new way of managing images, a new way of making that work in a public cloud. And that's not a small job. And also refactoring those images, getting your base images from an on-premises AHV deployment to a Azure deployment or an AWS one is difficult. Third-party integrations may or may not work as they do on premises. Stuff like backups, DR monitoring, they may need reinstalling, or you may need a completely different type, or run two different types of monitoring software, one to manage or one to monitor your public cloud data center, and the other to monitor your on-prem one. And then finally, network and security. Will your security policies you run in-house be sufficient in the public cloud, or even work properly? That will probably need a redesign. And then from an infrastructure standpoint, do you need to pick the right t-shirt sizes up front, or should you have the flexibility to then be able to move, scale those t-shirt sizes as you see fit? There's no reserve capacity natively in the public cloud for HA live migrations. This needs to be designed up front. And also the storage, there's no guaranteed availability or performance of the storage. So all of this needs to be thought through prior to extending your on-prem data center into the public cloud. So running a hybrid multi-cloud is challenging from an operational and a infrastructure standpoint. Let's imagine a true hybrid multi-cloud architecture and how that would look. You'd have one cloud platform for your on-prem DCs as well as your public cloud DCs to run your Citrix environment. You'll have Nutanix and Citrix license portability, enabling you to run your workloads anywhere on any hardware as your business require. There's native integration into the public cloud accounts from that single pane of glass that we talked about earlier. And you can also have the ability to seamlessly move your workloads between data centers, regardless of where they are, whether that be private or public cloud. And this negates the cloud lock-in and being able to move them to and from. And it's going to be done from a single platform. The same Citrix portal you already use, same Nutanix UI that you're already used to, and the same tools that you're used to, such as protection domain or automatic DR, but across multiple clouds. And the main thing here is ease of use and consistency. Being able to take our software and run that as an extension of your existing data center, but in the public cloud. Be that in AWS on EC2 bare metal instances, or in Azure on Azure bare metal nodes. It's going to be AHV, but running in the public cloud. Quick note on that, if you do run ESXi or Hyper-V, again, like I mentioned earlier, we can seamlessly migrate this and your images from those to an AHV in the an AHV cluster in the public cloud, injecting the Nutanix tools on the fly during the migration. So you can be up and running on cloud clusters in minutes, not hours. One difference here is that you're in Azure, you will deploy our software into a VNet, whereas in AWS, you'll deploy that into a VPC. But the point is, you can build Nutanix clusters on bare metal in AWS or Azure and run them exactly the same way that you do as your on-premises cluster. So if we look at that in more detail, it's effectively allowing you to stretch your on-prem DC into multiple cloud vendors and then have Prism overlay and manage all of it. All the Nutanix features that support your Citrix environment currently are going to work in the public cloud and be managed exactly the same way, such as LCM or lifecycle management for your upgrades, your software installations, Nutanix files for your Citrix profiles, that's going to work seamlessly, protection domains or orchestrated DR to move your images around or move your infrastructure around. Or for example, Nutanix Flow, if you want to use that for Citrix microseg, that's going to work in the same way in the public cloud as it does on-prem. All of this is done on bare metal. There's no nested virtualization or anything like that running in the cloud. It's either done on an EC2 bare metal instance in AWS or in an Azure bare metal node in Azure. And overlaying all of that is the Nutanix Cloud Clusters console, which I'll get to later on, but it's effectively like Foundation, but for your cloud nodes.
And one thing real quick, just recently released is Files 4.3.
Yes.
Which fully supports files on NC2 and Azure. That just went GA. It wasn't tech preview, but now it's GA. And the main thing there is support for VPC and overlay networks for files, whether you're on NC2 and Azure, or also if you're using that on-prem with Flow and PC.
Awesome. So some of the highlights with this kind of deployment, just-in-time scale and shrink, ideal for Citrix stuff. You can scale them up or down. It's going to give you that extra flexibility. I'm not going to go through all of these. Hibernate and resume, we will be talking about a little bit later. One of the cool things here, or two of them that I really like, is auto-host remediation. If the Cloud Clusters console picks up that one of your hosts is having an issue, it will automatically remove that from the cluster and put another one in for you. You don't have to do anything. It will just remediate them for you. And also you have the ability for global expansion without any local data center presence. So you can expand your business into other regions without going and buying a building and all the cooling, racking, everything else that goes along with that normally. Looking at the Nutanix Cloud Clusters global availability, AWS, it's a larger footprint because it's the first one we went with. We have 29 global regions. There's 7 different bare metal node types. It was originally 16 node clusters and 21, but we can now run a 28 node cluster in AWS. With Azure, you have 7 global regions, 2 bare metal node types, and currently 13 node clusters, but we have tested with 16, so keep your eye out and that'll be coming soon. And also we have our third-party bare metal as a service vendors in over 25 global locations, providing you like a big range of geos that you can deploy cloud clusters into. If we look at, apologies. If we look at how it works in Azure, when you have a presence in Azure, you're going to have a VNet that provides access into that cloud region, be that via express route or VPN. What we do is we deploy 2 VNets into your organization, into your subscription, your existing subscription. You can do this manually with a bit of config, but generally you would do it via the portal. One is for Prism Central and the Flow Gateway, and the other one is for the clusters. Because there's a slight network change in how Azure works over AWS. So we deploy Prism Central and Flow, the Flow Network Gateway into Azure for an overlay. Once that's up, you can connect those VNets via peering and connect to any existing Azure service or business application that you have residing in the public cloud and run your Citrix workloads on those clusters as if they were in your own data center. In a bit more detail, you can see we have 3 VNets here. We have our VNet for Prism Central and Flow Gateway, as well as the cluster VNet, and these appeared with that hub VNet. And like I mentioned on the prior slide, that hub VNet will be paired or connected back to your on-prem data center. You'll be running AHV across both. And the hub VNet could also be paired to Nutanix Cloud Clusters in AWS or any of the other third parties. If we look at the Azure region data, we looked at the big map earlier. We can see we started in the US, then we expanded to Asia and Australia. Then we opened up Europe, and we have Japan East coming later this year. As of today, there are 2 node types, the AN36 and the AN36P. Depending on where you deploy, will depend on the node types. But on our Nutanix documentation portal, we've got a reference architecture. It's either there or no, it's coming for Citrix on Azure with Nutanix Cloud Clusters, and we tested and validated that on the AN36P. So you'll get an idea of numbers of users, sizing, the performance you're going to get using login VSI or login enterprise. If we look at AWS in comparison to Azure, it is a lot simpler. Everything is deployed into your existing VPC and then connected back to your on-prem or other cloud providers using VPN or Direct Connect. Again, deployed the same way, but in this instance, the Flow Gateway and the Prism Central are optional. And we have a larger footprint. So you can see there are 7 different node types we have available in AWS, and that's across 29 regions. The cluster scale, you can go to 28 nodes rather than 16. The reference architecture we have up on the portal at the minute is based on the i3 node, which is on Broadwell architecture. There is one coming on the i4i node, which is Ice Lake, so it's double the cores and double the RAM. Jarian and I were chatting yesterday, and there's a M6 ID as well, which is also good for EUC, but you'll be able to get an idea of the numbers on the M6 ID once the i4i architecture is done, because you're literally halving the number of memory. So it will give you a good idea.
Yeah, the biggest 2 things there is that those are both Ice Lake, where the ones above it are a mixture of Broadwell and Sky Lake and Cascade Lake. But the nice thing here, so you get the latest architecture on the 2 bottom ones. They just launched this month in AWS, and we also went from 28 to 29 regions as well. So as Dave was saying, our next upcoming RA for AWS is going to have the i4i updates, which is a great node for EUC. If you don't need the terabyte of RAM, because that is kind of storage heavy, then you'll have that M6 ID as well, depending on your requirements and so forth.
Yeah, also something to note here is that there is a G4DN with GPUs available in AWS, which may be of use. Okay, Hibernate and resume. I think this is great in that it's going to reduce your costs. So what it does is you can offload and hibernate your cluster. So it will offload all of the data in the cluster to an S3 bucket when it's not in use. And it's done by the cloud portal. You can put a cluster into hibernation mode and it will sync all that data off and then eject those nodes. And then when you're ready, you can resume that cluster and it's going to pull all that data back in to the cluster, restore it, and then power it up. Now, depending obviously on the amount of data that you've got offloaded, it's going to take maybe a bit more time to restore. Currently, we're the only hybrid cloud solution that supports this. It's great with regard to Citrix. For example, you could bring a cluster up, replicate your Citrix environment or your infrastructure and your catalogs to it, and then hibernate that and only invoke it if you have a serious DR. The key is that you can recover your environment without any loss of data, and we restore all the state automatically with just a single click. And also, I can never say this, heterogeneous clusters. This is also in AWS, and what effectively means you can mix the node types that you deploy in the clusters in the public cloud. One caveat, you have to start with 3 nodes of the same type. So looking at the example up here, we can start with 3 i3 EN nodes that are going to meet your needs with regard to storage. So you can replicate your entire environment across. You've got plenty of storage in there, but it might be a bit light on the compute. In the event, for example, as a DR, you needed more compute, you could then add a bunch of i3 nodes to the same cluster to give you less storage heavy nodes, but higher compute nodes, which will expand that cluster and allow you to service more users. So thinking about Citrix in this, in a DR scenario, you could have, for example, a pilot-like cluster on very, very storage dense arrays running in AWS with a replica or a failover of your environment and pay very, very little for that. But then when DR is invoked or you're running a test, you could scale that up with i3 nodes and throw loads of compute at it, which will give you the environment you need for your users, but you're not paying for it all the time. As I mentioned earlier, the Cloud Clusters portal, this is effectively the heads-up display for all of your cloud clusters. It's like Foundation, but in the cloud. So your initial cluster deployment is done via this. You connect your cloud accounts as well as managing things like cluster expand, contract, hibernate, and resume. Once it's done in this, though, everything is done via Prism Central or the normal Prism UI that you're used to using. The other thing is licensing. The licensing isn't tied to a single cloud provider, whether that's on-prem or in AWS or Azure. There's no lock-in, so you can move your licenses from an on-prem environment out to AWS, or if it's not working out in AWS, you can shift them across to Azure or back. It's really, really up to you on where you assign those. And also, there is an unbundled billing model for that. So effectively, you pay the cloud vendor for the hardware, be that Azure, AWS, or any other clouds we expand to. And then you pay Nutanix and Citrix for the Citrix licensing and the Nutanix licensing, which we will come on to in a little bit about the options around that. There are 3 consumption models for Nutanix Cloud Clusters, sorry. Pay as you go. So it's effectively pay for what you need. Cloud commit is a reduced cost, but you've got an upfront year commit. Good use case for this with Citrix would be that pilot-like cluster. So you could have the pilot-like cluster running on cloud commit, and then when you need it, you can use the pay-as-you-go to scale that quickly. You've also got bring your own licenses where you can reallocate your capacity-based licensing that you have on premises now, or your VDI per user licensing, and shift that up to Nutanix Cloud Clusters. The consumption models, looking in more detail around the 2 vendors that we've got and we've been talking about. Nutanix software is licensed using the bring your own licenses, pay as you go, or cloud commit, or from the Azure marketplace, you can use pay as you go or cloud commit. With the bare metal instances, you've got on-demand, reserved, or convertible for AWS, and then on-demand and reserved for Azure. So from the marketplace, you can deploy direct and get the benefits, a couple of them being hybrid benefits or extended security updates for when those Citrix workloads get really sticky. And just to talk quickly about the licensing for Nutanix Cloud Clusters, whereby it aligns to Citrix. So Citrix traditionally is licensed per user. I know there are device licenses, but you have a bunch of users using Citrix, whereas compute is generally licensed by the host or the hardware. The per user VDI licenses, effectively it's going to align your Nutanix Cloud Clusters licenses to your Citrix licenses. So there are three flavors. You've got Starter, Pro, and Ultimate. To use this on Cloud Clusters, you have to use the Ultimate tier. But what it will give you the availability to do is, if, for example, you had 500 users and you deemed that 3 nodes was enough, you could run them on 3 nodes. Or if you wanted some more compute, you can run those same 500 users on a 6-node cluster. And we don't care about the hardware underneath. It's just about the number of users. Or you can deploy a couple of hundred users now and then add to that as you grow. There is a flow chart here about choosing the right license to sit with Nutanix Cloud Clusters and Citrix. I'm not going to go through it in the interest of time, but this will get sent out afterwards and you can have a look through and use that if you need. Just looking at the differences between Cloud Clusters on AWS and Azure and picking out a few differences. So AWS, you've got more instance types. Says 5 up there, it's actually 7, apologies. And then in Azure, you've only got 2. With AWS, you have Hibernate and Resume. And you've also got the Gov Cloud region there and GPUs. Whereas with Azure, you have the marketplace listing. One of the key points on here is that Nutanix Cloud Clusters for AWS uses the Prism Element plugin. So exactly the same as what you're using now on premises. So from Studio, you'll connect out to the Cloud Cluster running in AWS using PE, whereas the Azure Cloud Clusters uses a Prism Central plugin that is in early access, if I'm right, currently.
Yep, correct. It's in early access, hopefully targeted by the end of this year. And the main change there is that, as Dave showed, the architecture, when you deploy on Azure, you have to have the overlay networking, the VPC stuff, where that deploys Prism Central and Flow. And that's why the integration there is for Prism Central. That same Prism Central plugin will eventually make its way down to on-prem, because we can use some features like templates that will actually help you move your image around to multiple clusters easier than what we can do today.
Yeah. So before we get to the demo, looking at Citrix on Nutanix Cloud Clusters, I want to just look at how a couple of specific use cases around NC2. Business continuity, that's an obvious one. You can quickly build out DR sites in any cloud region using the existing methods that you have right now. And also on-demand elasticity and compute. You can like rapidly burst into the public cloud without refactoring anything for increased seasonal load. And that gives you rapid scale. So there's no code changes. You can use all your images as they are. Jarian is going to show this a bit later on, but you can take an image and just sling it into a public cloud running on NC2, and it's as though it's your own on-premises data center. Also good for test dev environments. You don't have to have a bunch of environments sitting around all the time for testing and development. You can spin them up and pull them back as and when you need them, which will save you money. And also migration. So moving Citrix from an on-premises environment to a public cloud environment can be a bit cumbersome. With Nutanix Cloud Cluster, it is really as simple as a single click operation, moving your images, creating some hosting collections, standing up some catalogs and delivery groups, and you've got you've got that there straight away, even if it's at a small scale with the intention to grow that. So with Nutanix Cloud Clusters, the Citrix solutions you're running on them become on demand and very portable. Nutanix Cloud Clusters on AWS and Azure are both Citrix Ready certified, and it's going to extend your on-prem environment into the Nutanix Cloud platform environment with no changes to the look and feel, while leveraging all your existing Citrix plugins. There is full support in any of the cloud providers for MCS as PVS and PVS, as well as all the other optional components that you deploy from Citrix today. So just having a look at a quick example, we do have a blog and a video on this where we burst 2,000 Citrix desktops into AWS in under 2 hours. I just want to run through how that would work. You have a Citrix solution on premises today. You would pick a supported public cloud vendor, such as AWS or Azure or one of the third parties, and then you'd extend the Nutanix Cloud platform using clusters into that public cloud. You'd then extend your Citrix services over there using protection domains or however you decide to get those images up there. And then you'd literally migrate those workloads or clone them, be them persistent or non-persistent, into the public cloud. Licensing. I just want to have a quick look at how that runs today. So Citrix have announced a new universal license that takes their hybrid use license and allows you to pick your control plane and which cloud you want to run it on. So if you want to run Citrix on top of NC2, you either have to have the universal license or the new CVAD subscription on-prem term licensing. There is a nice blog which is up on screen, which you can have a look at after this. Previously, it was DaaS or 1912 LTSR for public cloud consumption, but that's now changed, so it's well worth looking at that article. The integration points, we've got Citrix Studio. You manage your Nutanix clusters in the public cloud exactly the same way as you do on premises. It's all done through Studio. You get the same VM level performance metrics in Director that you would with an on-premises Citrix deployment on Nutanix. There's full Prism integration into Citrix DaaS with the one-click deployment supported, and PVS works exactly the same as it does on premises. We also have a new thing called AHV Templates, which are available using the Prism Central based plugin. What this will allow you to do is create a template and use this to deploy your images across multiple clusters. So Jarian is going to show this, but if all your clusters are managed under the same Prism Central instance, then this is going to push that image out to all of your clusters without you having to mess around and do anything. Quick touch on Citrix provisioning in the cloud. So PVS in any cloud with NC2, be that on AWS or Azure, is exactly the same as you do it on premises. The main difference being with native cloud, there is a bit of difference in how you will only have certain supported endpoint types and platforms. You might require some different tools to get there. With Nutanix Cloud Clusters sitting alongside Citrix, you can literally take the VHDX files, put them on your PVS store, and then spin up your VMs in exactly the same way as you would do on premises.
Actually, we'll close this out for closeout. Let me do the demo real quick from this one.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah.
All right, you got to pass the ball.
Do you want to just share and it will?
Yep, let me go here. Where is my, there we go. So everyone should be able to see my screen okay here. So in this demo video, what you're going to see here is this is our NC2 portal. And basically this is going to go through and show you all your clusters running, deploy your clusters, destroy your clusters, expand, contract. Also, you can hibernate for AWS and resume them. In here, I have my on-prem Prism Central, and this Prism Central instance has both my AWS cluster and an on-prem AHV cluster as well. First thing we do is enable disaster recovery, and then we create availability zones, one for on-prem PC, and then one for my Prism Central instance in Azure. Once we do this, we're going to go over to the other Prism Central that is in our Azure tenant, do the same things, enable disaster recovery, and then also to make sure that we have our availability zones listed as well. Local AZ being this Prism Central, the other PC being the on-prem Prism Central that covers both the on-prem and AWS cluster. Once that is done, then we're ready to do things like set up replication and other things. So we can do a protection policy, and you see here that we can use our on-prem cluster as our initial source and push that to both our cluster in AWS and Azure as well. And then also we can also do kind of a mesh type thing where we can replicate from in between Azure and AWS directly also. That way our image is always available. And then on that schedule, it's basically hourly, it's going to replicate that image. If we go here and look at our base VM, the first thing we do is we create a template from it, and it's pretty straightforward. This is using our new templates functionality in our more recent versions of PC and AHV. Once we have this template, this basically is our base image for MCS. That template is going to be in our template list, and because we have both AWS and on-prem under the same Prism Central, that's automatically pushed those clusters. When it comes to our other cluster with a separate PC, we basically restore that VM recovery point onto our Azure cluster. In the future, we'll have PC to PC template replication as well, but it's not there today. That's a roadmap item. And then once we go back to there, we have our VM, and then we also have to create a template on our Azure PC as well. Once we have our templates ready on our PC instances, then that's when we can go into Citrix Cloud and make sure that we have our hosting connections set up and so forth. So to show on here, we have our VMs on both sides and both clusters. Now we go into Citrix DaaS. We create our resource locations. You see I have one for AWS, Azure, and RDU. And this one, we're only going to go through the RDU and the Azure one because AWS and RDU are under the same PC instance. If I was using the PE plugin, I would deploy using the AWS one. Now we're going to go into the studio for the DaaS pieces and go down to the hosting connections. So in the hosting connections, you'll see that using our new Prism Central integration, let's go ahead and click through this. You see for Azure, it's just that one cluster because it's only the one, but you see for the RDU PC that we have both our AWS and our on-prem cluster. And again, with templates, that's going to push that automatically to those clusters for that base image. If you're an existing customer today, you're using protection domains or using recovery points, or you're using protection policies with templates, when this plugin is available, you'll be able to just have that seamlessly go across. From there, it's just go through and create our machine catalogs. Note the one change here. So in our drop down here, we select the PC connection for our Azure one. And then you see the main thing here is the exact same. The only difference here is you'll see that it's going to pick our cluster under that PC, and then the catalog for our base images, or for our deployed images. When we select our base image, we're selecting a template, not a snapshot. The template's always using the latest active version of the template today. We're doing some more templates work to be more smart about that. But then the rest of this here is just, the same stuff you'll see going forward with deploying Citrix in here. We'll do the same thing when we get to the AWS side. This should be done here in a second here, just going through real quick. But you'll notice that when we do the on-prem PC, we'll have a drop down for both the on-prem cluster and the cluster in AWS. And the rest here is just the same. Give it a name. and then click finish. And then we go through and that catalog is created. And the next step, we'll go through and create these delivery groups here. So I just add the machines to it. And then we can access them as they were just regular published resources in Citrix. I go back and I go through and I'll do the AWS or the on-prem side. But you see here, most of this is the same. It's just that when the hosting connection, we are selecting the Prism Central instance on-prem, which is going to have our resource for AWS on here. And this one's going across the VPN through the resource connection or the resource location cloud connectors on-prem because it's the same PC instance. But you see here the dropdown, I'll pick the cluster, and then the rest of it is the same from here. So I'll go ahead and hand this back to Dave so he can finish up. But you see here the integration, templates integration, Prism Central. Prism Central is required for Azure. It's optional AWS. If you have multiple clusters in the same Prism Central instance, that image replication is done in the background with their image templates. You don't have to go through and do any extra steps to get your base image around. I'm gonna go ahead and stop share here and hand it back over to Dave so you can wrap things up.
You see that right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So with what Jarian just showed, like this is quite important. Time to cloud matters with NC2, and once you've got the connectivity in place, getting your Citrix workloads in and out of the public cloud is super quick and super easy. There's no refactoring, no new interfaces to learn, no app dependency issue. It means you can get where you want to be and get there quickly. Just finally, the last couple of bits, efficiency gains using the public cloud when you're running NC2 and Citrix. With native cloud, you're locked into t-shirt sizes. And these, you can end up with a bunch of like micro waste with your VMs that you're running with. If you're running NC2 in the public cloud with Citrix, you're in complete control in exactly the same way you are as if you were running AHV on premises. And it means you've got the full availability of the bare metal that you're deploying to. So it means you can size your workers as you see fit, not be governed by a predefined t-shirt size. And you also get the full performance of the storage sitting underneath that, whether that be spinning disk or SSD. And it's going to give you guaranteed performance for your VMs in the public cloud. So why Citrix hybrid? You can build a hybrid cloud in hours is the first point up there. It really is simple, and you can manage everything in one pane of glass, whether that be your Citrix deployments. You can manage your Citrix images across all of your data centers, whether they be sitting in your own DC or whether they're in Azure or AWS. You can reduce the DR times and also migrate to the cloud. So one good use case is using this for DR, but there's also, like, if you have a multi-site deployment, as Jarian and I have talked about a few times, you can move those sites around into like smaller sites within different geos and do all of that sitting on top of one management platform. It is cheaper. There's some figures up there. It's 51% cheaper than cloud native. That, again, it depends on how you run it all and how it's configured, but you can reduce the cost for this because you can scale things back, you can hibernate things, and you can only use what you need when you need it. And with that, we do have Nutanix Cloud Clusters with Citrix DaaS in AWS. You can just sign up for a test drive. There's Jarian signing up there. We do have also some additional resources. So these will be sent out to everyone after this presentation, so you can do test drives. There's some videos up there. Also have a look on the Nutanix documentation site on our team site. We've got reference architectures, or we'll have reference architectures for all of this. One of the questions I was just asked a minute ago is, do we have like best practice guides for deploying this stuff? It's all up there. We test it. we make sure that it works. We have guaranteed numbers, so it's all there for you to consume. And with that, I believe the only person with his hand up is Eduardo, unsurprisingly.
Where do you see that? The hand up?
It's in the, oh no, he's just put his hand down.
Okay.
There you go.
Eduardo, if you have a question, hit us up in the Q&A or okay.
Oh,
okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, and then back to what Dave was saying. So on the portal today, we have reference architecture guides for Azure on I'm sorry, AWS NC2 with Citrix using the i3 metal nodes. We are going to be updating that for the i4i nodes. Azure, we have those going through the final processes to be out there on the portal. So look for those soon. For those of you doing DR, we also have a DR guide with Citrix DaaS with NC2 on AWS that goes over a lot of this stuff too. We have some things on RTO and RPO as well. So the recovery time objective, recovery point objective, things on replicating your base images for MCS and your VHDX files for PVS. All that testing stuff is in those guides. Look for Azure soon. And then again, later on this year, we'll have the i4i ones. Since those just got released, we'll start testing those as well. We do have a GCP question in the chat, so I'll address that on here also. Customer demand, right? Customer demand drives a lot of stuff, but also to the technology and public cloud. So for example, AWS already had their bare metal solution and their APIs to do it. That's why we were able to quickly deploy those and get that as our first solution. With Azure, it was a code-developed solution for our NC2 solution. So GCP will probably have to do something along those lines. Either they'll have to get their bare metal solution off the ground or look at something co-developed. But again, that's all customer demand based, and GCP is always asked when we do these sessions. So if GCP is an interest to you, make sure you let your local team know. We can let product management know. That way we can see what else is going to come on the radar for customer demand.
Also on that, like Azure regional availability is also largely driven by customer demand as well. So if you have a region with a big presence that you need NC2 in, then that's something like Jarian said, let your local teams know, and then that will get fed back and looked at.
Yeah, a good example of that is Japan, right? Japan wasn't on the roadmap, and we have huge demand for Japan, and now Japan's getting fast tracked to be available this year for Azure. So thank you all. A recording will be available. Usually that's sent out through CUGC and on the YouTube channel. I guess Stephanie can address that one, but yeah, they're usually out there available.
Okay, yes, definitely. Yeah, I'll be sending out the recording link, and it sounds like maybe you're sharing the slides. Is that true too?
Yeah, we can throw the PDF out there to send out.
Awesome. All right, well, I'll send all that out with the link tomorrow. And also, I think some of you may have opted in for a chance to win an Amazon gift card. So I will randomly choose, I like to say, the winner after this webinar is done. So be on the lookout for an email from us or watch us on Twitter to see who won. And I think that wraps everything up. Thanks again for being here today, Dave and Jarian. It's good to have you.
Thank you. Always happy to be here.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. See you at the next webinar or at a CUGC event again soon. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye.